Good evening. Welcome back to the Deep 404. There's been a lot of talk on social media, both Telegram and Twitter or X, about the downing of a large number of Russian aircraft in the last week. If we go back a few weeks to the 14th of January, there was the claims made then by Ukrainian Air Force and Ukrainian social media channels that both an IL-22 airborne mobile command post had been shot down, along with an A-50, an AWACS, reconnaissance plane. Out of what appeared to have been the end result out of that was that the IL-22 was confirmed as having been shot down. The plane landed, damage to the plane, and it seems at this stage the best guess is that it was a Russian friendly fire which brought down that IL-22. However, there's never been any confirmation of an A-50 going down at that date a few weeks ago in January. Now, we have another report now of another A-50 having been shot down. So over the weekend, there's been this reports of an A-50 being shot down. There's some video which is reportedly of it. I'll just get that for us so we can have a look at this if you would like to see. Now, this video, what it is showing is heat traps being thrown off by an aircraft. Now, I can't tell from this footage what the aircraft is, and this is what a lot of the challenge is about this video, is that this video has been reported on one relatively new channel on Twitter, but it doesn't indicate if this video is actually recent, if this occurred in Russia. That white spot I think you're seeing in the top left there is the moon, I believe. And we just keep seeing the heat traps being thrown off. And this doesn't verify if this was an A-50 involved. Now, there might be some experts out there who can look at this and who can determine by the frequency of the heat traps being released or the number of them being released. Perhaps something like that is an indication that, yes, this actually is an A-50. Top right there was just an interceptor exploding. And in a moment here we go. So that appears to be a air defense interceptor, which has struck this plane, and this plane now appears to be broken into parts and burning and will crash. There's not much more to this video. The heat traps aren't thrown out anymore. But from the best digging I can do at this stage, I can't find confirmation that this is an A-50 being shot down. There do seem to be reports that a military plane was struck and was shot down. There's one eyewitness report allegedly which says that it was a helicopter. There are others that refute that and say no, it was definitely an aircraft. I'll just go back to the map here for a second. Where this reportedly happened, so this is Ukraine, this is Crimea down here on our map. This is the Black Sea. Now, reportedly the shoot down of this craft was between Rostov-on-Don and Krasnodar here. And if I've read correctly, the reported landing site or crash site is around this area here. Now, what's interesting about this point is if we go from here and measure our distances, from here to get out to as near the front line as we can get, 380 kilometers, 420 kilometers up here, 360 kilometers. Now, it's not necessarily confirmed that that plane was exactly in this area when it was shot down. However, if you could sort of see from that video that if that was video of the plane being shot down, I don't think it travelled too far from when it was obviously engaged by air defence to when it was shot down. So if that's the case, I don't think it would have travelled too far around this area. So it may have been a little bit closer, but what I'm getting at here is that if it was actually in this area and shot down in this area, then it's very difficult to conceive of any Ukrainian air defense missiles that would have taken it out. There has been talk that some of the other planes that have been shot down, so the reports, again, the Ukrainians are talking about shooting down 7 Su-35s, 34s and 35s in the last week. And that would have been done by Patriots along the front line. Now, we do have reports and some video footage of where this green dot is here over Kherson, of a Patriot battery being destroyed here last week. And there is now further reports coming of a second Patriot battery being destroyed. So there is definitely some evidence of Ukrainians pushing the Patriots up towards the front line in the hope of getting some Russian jets. But there doesn't seem to be great evidence that they have been successful. Certainly there is no indication at all backing up 7 Russian jets being lost. There is talk of 1 or possibly 2 having been shot down. Even some of that reporting is confusing as to if they're referring to a second Su-35 or Su-34 in the last week or so, or if they're referring to a previous Su-35 being shot down and now one being shot down this week. What it looks more likely to be is that some military plane was shot down over here over the weekend, which is being claimed by the Ukrainians to be an A-50, but there's no evidence. I mean, there's no evidence that I'm aware of anything confirming an A-50. Nothing to confirm the one from January. Something likely to confirm the IL-22 being shot down. And it appears to be at least one Su-35 has come down. This, whatever this plane was that was shot down between Krasnodar and Rostov-on-Don, appears most likely to have been brought down by Russian air defense, being a failure of the IFF, the Identify Friend or Foe system. The IL-22, again, the story, the most likely shooting cause for it being shot down was again Russian friendly fire. Now, if this is the case, this is not good for Russia. If Ukrainian air defense was shooting down these jets, that's not good for Russia. If Russia is shooting them down, then that is also not good for it. In some respects, may be considered even worse because it's a terrible own goal to bring down your own planes. And there are questions being raised about how that could be happening, how it could be happening this frequently if it is the cause. I'm not an expert on IFF systems, but they are some sort of a communication or signaling system which provides information about the allegiance of an aircraft. In the case of the Russians, is this a Russian aircraft or not a Russian aircraft? So if it has been the Russians that have managed to shoot down this undisclosed but claimed by the Ukrainians A-50 and the IL-22, then that is a problem for the Russians that they need to figure out and resolve. Now, obviously, they are flying. They're active. They're flying a lot of sorties in this area. They've got a lot of aircraft in that area, but still, you would think that they would be able to manage the friend or foe identification of aircraft in the area successfully. But again, in saying that, I have no experience with wartime conditions and what really happens there and how those systems are enacted. And it may well be the case that certain craft fly, perhaps disabling them, looking to be as stealthy as possible, just disabling all signals, and that then may be the cause of how something like this happens. The challenges that this raises for the Russians is that the recent shooting down of the IL-76, which contained the 65 Ukrainian POWs, there was, an initial statement, well, not an initial statement, a statement that came out, I think, from even President Putin, that this can't have been a Russian shoot down because the IFF system would have identified this as being a Russian plane. Now, subsequently, it appears as though what was the cause of the shoot down of that IL-76 with the POWs on it, was Patriot missiles, American Patriot system, perhaps some French involvement in the commanding of the Patriot system, perhaps, and that was what brought down. So it was Ukrainian air defense that brought down the IL-76. But again, it creates problems for President Putin if on one hand he was saying our IFF would not have allowed us to do that, and yet now we have claims that this jet and this unidentified plane shot down over the weekend are most likely have been brought down by the Russian air defense systems. So, has Ukraine shot down 9 aircraft in the last week? No. It seems possible that they may have shot down one, the jet. It's possible. But it seems like that's about it. The other claims of the 3 a day and then 2 the day after and then another 2 after that, which came out from Ukraine, just seem to be more of a smokescreen, something to deflect away from the bad news of Avdiivka and the solid continuing roll westward, which the Russians seem to be enforcing upon the Ukrainians at this time. So another thing then, which is interesting, is that there are reports, this is coming from Military Watch website, a Western website, that they are suggesting that in fact the Russian S-400 systems may now be capable of shooting down Patriot interceptor missiles. So instead of the S-400s just shooting down cruise missiles and shooting down planes and aircraft, that they may in fact have had enough experience now with seeing Patriots being fired that they can actually intercept them. The reason they are suggesting from their website is because the Patriot missiles move at a speed of about Mach 3.5, possibly some reporting up to Mach 5, whereas the S-400 missiles, Military Watch website reports, can travel at up to Mach 14, so far, far faster, and capable then of intercepting Patriot missiles. The Patriot missiles, again, only have really a reported range of about 160 kilometres, which means that in order for them to be striking that far from the front line, if we go just again back to our map for a moment here, we'll just measure, say from the front line here, 160 kilometres gets you out to here, the Sea of Azov, just to the other side of the Sea of Azov from the Zaporozhye region. It doesn't get you much further than that. So any aircraft that are flying out beyond that range should, in theory, be safe from any Patriot system. And the Patriots, bringing them close to the front line, is dangerous for them. There are second reports this week. It's the second, I believe, in a week, reports of Russian strikes on Patriot systems near the front line. So yeah, maybe even S-400s now being used against the actual Patriot interceptor missiles themselves. Other news in the last 24 hours, President Zelensky and his interview and his claims about Ukrainian losses. So he has claimed that throughout this conflict, 31,000 Ukrainian servicemen have been killed. He further claims that 180,000 Russian servicemen have been killed in this conflict. Interestingly, there is a Telegram channel, which is a Ukrainian Telegram channel. It's called Legitim. It's a very interesting one. It seems to be quite reliable in its reporting, and it is often critical of the government in Ukraine, of Zelensky. It may be one of 2 websites which appear to have some connection with former General Zelensky. and perhaps through connections of his received some of their information. Their take on Zelensky's comments about there being only 31,000 Ukrainians killed in this 2-year conflict, because we've just reached the 2-year point, is that officially that may be correct, because the 31,000 are the officially reported number of Ukrainian soldiers killed in this conflict. They are the ones reported by the Ministry of Defence as being killed and where payment has been made out to their families. However, Legitim suggests that there are another 50,000 being pursued by families but not yet recognised. Now, how they get this is that they speak of having contacts within the military leadership and within the parliamentary leadership of Ukraine. So they are suggesting that the 31,000 that Zelensky is speaking about is the official number, but there are another 50,000 being pursued now by families who are saying, look, they're dead. We want you to recognise them as dead and pay us out. But that hasn't happened yet. So that brings the number up to 81,000, not 31,000, but 81,000. However, Legitimi then go on to say they believe that there is then somewhere between 70 and 90,000 who are listed as missing. But these missing men are not missing, they are dead. They may either intentionally indicated and reported as missing when it is known that they are dead, or they are actually missing and have been unaccounted for and their bodies haven't been returned, but they are in fact dead. So this brings the number up to, what do we have, 80 to 170,000, somewhere in that range. So Legitimi, a Ukrainian channel, suggesting that while technically, officially, what President Zelensky has said about there being 31,000 dead Ukrainians from this conflict, while that may technically be correct, that the real number of dead is somewhere near 170,000 or more. Now, I did a show on this a week or so ago. You can have a look and find it if you're interested. It's called Just How Many Men Has Ukraine Lost? And I've got a link to it in the description of this video. And in there, I think using Media Zona and BBC's numbers and adding on some extra for the men killed in from the Donbass area that weren't in the Russian army, I think we got to a number about maybe 70 or 75. You could sort of be estimating it being a fair number for killed Russian servicemen, 70 or 75,000. Here we're getting from a Ukrainian source that the Ukrainian number is maybe 170, 180,000. So it's 2 and a bit times that, maybe 2.3 times. So we might be looking at, and again, these numbers, I can't validate them, but the Media Zona numbers are probably the most accurate guess that we have got for Russian losses. For Ukrainian losses, this suggestion that I'm hearing from Legitimi or reading from Legitimi is probably the best stuff that I've got to go on at the moment. And so that would give you a number that's just about 2.3 times the Russian number. That probably makes sense, given that the Ukrainians had the upper hand for the first 8 or 9 months of the conflict. They had more men on the ground. Since that time, though, through the offensive that the Ukrainians made, the Russians have grown their numbers. The Ukrainians have, for months and months and months, reported shell shortages. We've known that the Ukrainian Air Force has been pinned down and unable to provide very much frontline support at all, while the Russians have been able to do that. And the Russians have been enacting daily missile and drone strikes on the logistics and rear of the Ukrainian forces, and depleting their ability to fight to the same level, and with reports of there being 4, 5, 10, 12, 15, 20 times as many shells being fired by the Russians as the Ukrainians for sustained periods, plus things like the TOS-1 heavy flamethrower systems that the Russians have that Ukrainians don't, plus the use of Fab 500 bombs and Fab 1000s and Fab 1500s, which the Russians have, the Ukrainians don't have. It seems likely that the Ukrainian losses would be higher by some number. I was suggesting in my video, I felt like it might be up around the 4 or 5. If we use these numbers from Legitim and then the media zone numbers for Russia, it's 2.3. I think that in any case, that ratio is likely to be increasing. There are reports today that to the west of Avdiivka and Lastochkino, that defensive line that the Ukrainians had tried to establish there after Avdiivka fell, that is now being breached by the Russians. So we are seeing the Ukrainians falling back to less fortified positions, not as strongly fortified as Avdiivka, and are starting to lose those positions in Robotny, in down the Zaporozhye region. Reports that the gains that were made by the Ukrainians during the offensive of last year are now being unwound and pushed back by the Russians. So as this is happening, as the Ukrainian forces are retreating without air cover to protect them, with Fab 500s and TOS flamethrower systems being used on them by a growing Russian army. Reports coming out now that Russia is moving up large numbers of forces from Crimea. To me, this indicates that this ratio of losses being 2 to 3 in Russia's favour, so for every one Russian, 2.3 Ukrainians are lost, that is likely to grow. And again, as I say, I can't confirm figures either way, but it certainly makes more sense and seems to align with what you would expect, that the Ukrainians are losing more men than the Russians are in this conflict. And as I say, unfortunately for the Ukrainians, I think that will increase if we are starting to see them being routed and being pushed backwards, particularly if these reports of now additional Russian troops moving up from Crimea are true. Now, the fact that they're moving up from Crimea also makes me, sort of strengthens my idea here that what we might see if we've got forces coming up here from Russia, from Crimea, moving up this way, is that what those forces will be looking to do is to get across the Dnieper River. Get across the Dnieper. Force any sort of support that might go to Zaporozhye from anywhere now to have to go up this way, and to enable the Russians to once across the Dnieper River, to be able to then make an attack on Mykolaiv and then ultimately across here to Odessa. Taking Odessa does a couple of things. There's talk about in Transnistria on the edge of Moldova wishing to assert its independence. They will want Russian support for that. They already have 1,500 Russian troops in Transnistria. By taking Odessa across to the tip of Moldova here, then that area of Transnistria becomes joined to Russia. The troops there can support this line. There's about 4.5, if I'm right, 4.5 to 7,500, maybe 5 to 7,500 Transnistrian troops as well, who will no doubt side with the Russian forces there. So the Russians get that benefit by taking Odessa, but also by taking Odessa, they stop completely the threat of sea drones attacking the Black Sea Fleet, which allows the Black Sea Fleet to come out, which is something they don't want to do right now because they have suffered losses due to them. So yeah, I think it's interesting to watch if we do get confirmation that there are large numbers of Russian forces moving up from Crimea, just to see exactly where they go. If they're moving up and moving north or to the west, then I think they are going to look to get across the Dnieper and establish a presence there. If they do start to move up to the northeast, perhaps then they're heading up here to support, going around the eastern edge of the Novokharkovka reservoir, which has dried out to a large extent now, to put pressure on Zaporozhye, and then perhaps move up this line and cut off this line down here of Dnipro to Zaporozhye and to form a barrier along there. Remember that there is an interesting story too of that large, was it 32-kilometre long train that the Russians have cobbled together 2,500 train carriages, and that is planned to be used as some sort of defence somewhere. Now, where that might come into play, I don't know. But if you were looking to hold a long area, a long line or something like this, being able to run a big metal wall up for 30 kilometres would be a nice way to secure something like that. All right, I'm going to leave that here tonight. I will hopefully be back with another show for you tomorrow. Yeah, hope you're doing well, and I look forward to talking to you. Oh, for those of you who are interested, I have established membership on the channel now. After reaching 1,000 subscribers, thank you for your support. There are memberships there, so you can, if you want to, subscribe to that, and I will start to provide some member-only content in that area. All right, talk to you again soon.